In today's episode of Beyond the Book, we're going to the Big Bear Native American Museum, located on the Historic Chisholm Trail in Cleburne, Texas.
You're about to visit the Big Bear Native American Museum, located in Cleburne, Texas. The museum is named after Leonard Beale, known as Big Bear. And Big Bear lived in California, and he was an enthusiast about knowing everything about Native Americans because he was part Native American himself. We're going to start with the educational part of this so that everybody can learn that the Native Americans had tools that shows how they were able to form all sorts of tools out of rock known as flint, chip them using antlers into the arrowheads and all of the different types of tools that they needed. They had as many tools to cut and saw and drill, just like your dad has in your garage. They had hammers, and they had everything that they needed. It wasn't as sophisticated as what we have today, but it is still very efficient in them being able to live a very high quality life. Okay, the question is being asked now, and is changing very rapidly, is when did the Native Americans arrive in the United States or North America? And one of the ways for 100 years that people thought that they came down first through Alaska and down through Canada into the United States, as this graph shows over here, and now they realize that the first people came along the coastline and moved all the way down to South America. And they probably arrived here something like 17,000 BC. Native Americans, using the tools that we just saw, made points that look like this that's in this case. As you'll see, they're not really arrowheads. They are really called dart points because they're utilized with a throwing stick called an atlatl. This is an illustration of how an atlatl is used to project one of these dart points. And they can project them at a speed, at such a high rate of speed that they can kill a deer or an antelope at about 80 or 100 yards. If you took one of these items that are called arrowheads by some people and tried to put them on the end of an arrow, you can see that the arrow would not work. So what we have over here, we have true arrowheads. Some people call these bird points, but again, you can tell that if you took one of these and put it on the end of an arrow, you would have something that would actually be able to work. So we had a technology change. The bow was invented, and when the bow was invented, and in Texas, it was in the neighborhood of about 400 AD that the bow and arrow was beginning to be utilized by Native Americans. You remember how I just showed you that this is an actual arrowhead that fits perfectly on the end of an arrow. I'm going to show you something that you will be interested in, because next to this arrowhead is something that is extremely small. It is a toy arrowhead that is utilized to teach boys, as soon as they're old enough to pull a bowstring, how to hunt. The Native Americans used all games and toys in order to help them learn how to survive, and as soon as they were old enough to be able to hunt, they were out hunting squirrels and rabbits and other things of that size. We have just learned how the Native Americans used bows and arrows, and before that, atlatl, in order to hunt. One of the main things that they hunted were deer, if deer lived in their area. And this display shows how they use all parts of the deer for something. They used them to make awls. This is a rasp that they use to make music. This is a hairpin that they use for their hair. And they also, once they hunted and they had meat, then they cooked those over an open fire, but they also made stews out of some of the things that they were able to kill. But at this point in time, they were not able to cook in a pot like a pan like we have. And what they wound up using is they wound up using what's called boiling stones, and they put them in a hide container that had their stew in it, and they heated these boiling stones up and dropped them into the stew until the stew meat was cooked. We have seen that Native Americans were able to take what they had in their environment and craft it into items that they need. One of the things they were able to do was weave plants into mats and baskets. Well, as time progressed, they needed to carry water in these baskets, but they were not able to do that because the baskets were porous. It leaked water. So they wound up putting clay on the outside of it and set the baskets in the hot sun that caused the clay to harden almost like it was being fired into a vessel. And that created the idea that they could utilize the clay to create better vessels. We have seen how they were able to weave plants into mats and into baskets, and we see a comparison between a gourd that is similar to a cantaloupe or a watermelon, and they utilize those for dippers. And then from being able to create the water basket that we just saw, they began to create ceramics, and this is an example of a ladle or a dipper that was modeled after the gourd. We also have larger vessels, some of them that are very artistically painted, and these vessels begin to arrive in the Southwest, and the Southwest is in Arizona and New Mexico, somewhere around 800 AD. And this is an olla that carried water that we saw and stored water in it. And this is a bowl that they used for serving or cooking material in it. We have seen how the deer was very important to the Native Americans. On the plains, the bison were equally important, if not more so, because of the larger animal. They used the hides for everything that you can imagine, from overcoats down to what we have down here are the boots, and they utilize all parts of the bison just like they did the deer. Fortunately, in the 1800s, the bison hides began to be very popular in Europe. Estimated 60 million bison were on the plains of North America. And within about a 10-year period, almost all of them were killed for their hides. The bison themselves were left on the plains, and the hides were taken. Today, there is somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 left, but there's only a small number of that is from the original herds, and they are in preserves and protected in Canada. We're going to see now some of the Native American dress, and you're going to be looking at a typical dress whenever they're doing ceremonial dances. And just over to this side is a wedding dress. This is a typical wedding dress that Native Americans might make for their wedding. This dress belonged to a Native American that donated to the museum. This was her wedding dress, and her name was Quiet Dove. And down below we have the drums. That was one of the two major instruments that the Native Americans used for music. The other one is the whistle. You're looking at some game balls, stone balls, that is used in a game called Chunky that they played that helped sharpen their ability to throw spears or shoot bows and arrows. You're also looking at a turtle, and we saw that how the turtle is one of the musical instruments that they utilize during their ceremonies. And what you're looking at is the game of stickball that the Native Americans played. And in this case are two sets of sticks and a leather ball that have been used in the game of stickball. One of the things that is extremely important is to recognize the role of Native American women in the Native American society. Women were very important individuals in most tribes. Most tribes were matrilineal, and the word matrilineal meant that the woman owned everything, and everything passed down through the female part of the family. And so they held very esteemed positions within the tribe. And these are tools that they utilized. In the center of this were brooms, and especially I want you to pay attention to these cradles on the very bottom of the display. And the one cradle that was made for newborn babies, that again we've talked about how they utilize plants in order to create needs. And here is a way that they created a cradle very similar to the way they created baskets.